Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would talk about this little video and this subject that I found to be very particularly interesting. And this is going to be a video, I believe, overall by that of DontaesBoxingNation. And I am editing more videos as I speak. So, once again, I do apologize for not really posting as much as of late. But recently, Mr. Turki Alalshikh, who of course has made quite a bit of sound waves within boxing within that of the past couple of years, because of course he's done a lot of work within that of boxing in terms of offering money and in terms of trying to set up certain big fights. And of course, he has set up a certain amount of very big matches within that of the sport of boxing. But recently, Turki Alalshikh, he has gone under fire, apparently for a recent tweet that he ended up making stating that he doesn't want any more quote unquote Tom and Jerry type of fights, meaning that he doesn't really want any type of running or non competitional fights, which to a certain degree, I can kind of understand. But of course, Turki Alalshikh, he is going under fire, or he is kind of under fire from a certain amount of the LDBC and new media channels, especially. And I don't completely blame them. But, of course, especially when it comes to a lot of these channels, if you say something that they may particularly disagree with, or if you say something that may trip their radar, oftentimes immediately in their eyes, it's quote unquote racial or it's quote unquote racist. And I don't think that what Turki Alalshikh is doing, I don't think it's quote unquote racist. I just think overall that what he's doing is that he wants to make sure that his future events, that overall they pay off a little bit more than some of the most recent ones that have happened. Because, no offense against Turki Alalshikh, but for those of you that pretty much watch him, and some of the tactics that he uses in boxing, he's someone that comes across to me as that, he's someone that is a boxing fan and also believes that he can make a decent amount of money off of it. But the problem is that, it's almost kind of like, when you're a child, and you say, well, how come overall, the WNBA players or something like that, how come they can't get just as much money as the NBA players, or, like how some of these liberals may act? How come overall women can't be paid just as much as men in this particular area, at least within that of the WNBA? Why can't they get similar salaries? And then you start to realize what business and the business model is actually about, and that's not how business works. You have to basically get a transaction based off of your quote unquote value. Now, that situation, of course, isn't really as relatable here, but my point being is this. Turki Alalshikh believes that just because he makes a certain amount of great matchups within boxing, that it's going to pay off. And at the end of the day, sometimes you have to do things a little bit differently in order for promotions to really be good or make a great payout. And most recently, although he's had a couple of very decent matchups, his events have pretty recently been terrible. The Canelo Alvarez and William Skull matchup was not the best matchup in the world. The Teofimo Lopez, Ryan Garcia, Devin Haney card was pretty much a nightmare. And although I thought that it was a creative idea to have it within Times Square, it did not really end up well. It felt, a lot of, energy was lacking within that card. And on top of that, it was just a weird setting to really have it in. So I think Turki Alalshikh, that he's trying to make adjustments or improvements to his future cards, which I can understand to a certain degree. But the question is that what is he going to do to fix it? Well, one of the more recent things that he's trying to do in order to fix it is to make the ring smaller, at least for some of the future fights, which I can understand to a certain degree. But I think that Turki Alalshikh, in order to understand the business of boxing, he also needs to realize overall selling a fight a little bit more. And on top of that, what type of matchups to make at certain times. Because just because a matchup seems great on the surface doesn't mean that it's the best thing to do at that current moment in time. But anyways, Turki Alalshikh, I just thought that it was interesting what he was doing. But anyways, DontaesBoxingNation is going to talk about it, of course. We all know how Dante was going to take this, and I understand it overall to a degree, and I get it, because boxers, in my personal view, should be allowed to fight the way that they fight, as long as it's something that will, breed them relative success. But anyways, let's get into it. Let's see what Dante has to say.
Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? So Turki Alalshikh, he put out this post, and I believe it was the most bizarre post that he's ever put out, and it's been getting a lot of attention. He put out this post. I made a video about it before, but I want to go ahead and read what he said just in case some of you guys didn't see it. He said, from this point on, I don't want to see any more Tom and Jerry type boxing matches where one fighter is running around the ring and the other is chasing him. He said we can longer, which I think he meant to say we can no longer support these kind of fights with Riyadh season and the ring. We want to support fighters who leave it all in the ring and fight with heart and pride. First of all, let me just say this. Any man that's willing to get in the ring, not only get in the ring, but get in the ring for a living is already fighting for heart and pride. Not, of course.
Well, sometimes. then sometimes, they're kind of fighting either for a paycheck like a Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. or, not only for pride, but also maybe to impress, maybe someone else. But I know what Dante is saying. I would mainly agree.
Turki Alalshikh says this, he's just deferring to race fans on the internet and just repeating their talking points. But when the race fans on the internet...
I'm just going to state this personally, and this is the thing overall that most people may not understand. But in terms of your quote-unquote model, in terms of your business, you are going to have to appeal to a certain amount of the people overall that are attracted to your sport. Now, am I stating overall that it's quote-unquote right to be calling many fighters runners or anything like that, or to try to make them fight differently? No, not necessarily. But at the end of the day, the point being is that the majority of boxing fans don't want to see an event or a fight that ended up transpiring like that of a Canelo Alvarez or William Skull or something like that. They don't want to end up seeing something like that. And, certain people, may say that, of course, Dante, he ended up predicting that he was mainly talking about Devin Haney versus that of what was his name, Jose Ramirez. But personally, I don't believe that that was the only fight that he was talking about. I think Dante is predicting that that's the main fight that he's talking about in order to appease to a certain amount of the race fans, which you are going to have to do to a certain degree. And almost every boxing fan, to be honest with you, about 80% of them are really race fans to begin with, including DontaesBoxingNation. He's not fooling anybody. At least he's not fooling me. But I mean, the thing is that you are going to have to appeal overall to certain constituencies. It just is what it is, But anyway.
Says this, it doesn't mean anything. On the internet says this, it doesn't mean anything. It means something when Turki Alalshikh says this. So if Turki is willing to say something like this, he should share his boxing knowledge and break down, explain to boxing fans what is considered running. Is it when a boxer backs up and sets up traps? Or is it when a boxer is using the same type of foot movement that Muhammad Ali used, circling around the ring?
Well, to be quite honest with you, I don't really know how extensive Turki Alalshikh's boxing knowledge actually is. Once again, he comes across to me as a fan, and he comes across to me as a guy that watches a lot of the fights, but he doesn't come across to me as someone that has a super extensive knowledge overall about what may make a particular fighter great, or especially how to promote a boxing business model. Once again, it's great that he's putting on a certain amount of great matchups, but in the way or the arenas that he's put them in, and on top of that, the matchups at certain times, at particular times, I mean, they just weren't the best. But that being stated, I can't blame everything on him, because the Ryan Garcia-Rolly Romero fight was supposed to be much more entertaining than what it was. The Teofimo Arnold Barbosa fight I thought was relatively good, but it just wasn't that competitive. But anyone could pretty much see that overall if you took a look at the styles of the two fighters. And on top of that, when you take a look at Devin Haney versus Jose Ramirez, it's the same thing. Devin Haney overall is a guy that's a highly defensive fighter. And when you talk about Jose Ramirez, although of course he's labeled as a quote-unquote Mexican pressure fighter, he's not someone that ever has the highest amount of output. So at the end of the day, he needed, in my view, to kind of make the matchups a little bit better, at least, out of one of those fights. And of course, with the main event being as bad as what it was, it just made it all that much more worse.
Floating like a butterfly and stinging like a bee. Is running what Lomachenko did against Teofimo Lopez. Is it what
Lomachenko, in my view, did somewhat run against Teofimo Lopez, because at the end of the day, you cannot move around for the first 6 rounds, barely throw any punches, and expect to win the fight. If you're asking me certain fights overall where a fighter was quote-unquote running, and I don't use that term very often, because oftentimes when someone, talks about the term quote-unquote running in a particular boxing fight, it usually means that they're talking about a fighter that they don't like, that they're moving on their back foot and outboxing that particular opponent, especially if they're a black fighter. So I do think that Dante has a little bit of relevance with what he's stating there. But Turki Alalshikh, in my personal view, I don't know if he's just talking about one particular fighter here. I think what Dante believes is that he's only talking about black fighters or talking about Devin Haney here, but I think that he's talking about, a multitude of fighters, because a multitude of events that he's recently put on have kind of not appeared as great, and of course could affect the bottom line and could affect the money a little bit later on. I don't care how big of a fan you are, and I don't care how many big matchups that you want to put on. At the end of the day, you are going to have to turn a profit. And at the current moment in time right now, Turki Alalshikh's, events have not really been that good. So we'll see.
What Madrimov did against Ortiz is running what Oscar Valdez did against Miguel Burchell. Or is Turki only considering it running when he's seen what Devin Haney did against Ramirez?
And what I would consider running, quote unquote, was like what Guillermo Rigondeaux did against that of a John Rael Casimero. And yeah, I thought that Rigondeaux still could have potentially won that fight, but you can't move around the ring the whole entire time, throw like a few punches per round, and be completely shocked when you lose by split decision. William Skull, in my view, did a certain amount of running against Canelo Alvarez. Not necessarily that the foot movement and being on the back pedal was the bad choice, but he just didn't throw enough. And with Canelo's age and very clearly having a struggle getting inside the range, especially for his age, he probably could have won that fight had he been throwing consistently. But it was very obvious, especially for a young gun such as himself, he was not, he did not think that he could win really in that way. He really did not try enough in order to win the fight. Now, are there certain fights to where people say that that fighter was quote unquote running where I disagree? Like overall with Mayweather and some of his fights, or say Lara against Canelo? Yeah, I disagree with those. But at the end of the day, once again, and Devin Haney against Jose Ramirez, I'm not going to claim that Devin Haney was running the whole time, but it definitely was not the most impactful fight. And on top of that, there were certain times where Haney was running a little bit, because at the end of the day, there's only so much that you can defend a fight or a fighter, where the fight had, I believe, the lowest amount of punch ratio or punches thrown for a championship level fight. So, I mean, it just is what it is. But, Devin Haney was a guy that, of course, was coming back, and we didn't know how he was going to recover. So I'm not going to go too harshly after him for that. But Jose Ramirez, once again, that's why I say Turki, that he needs to understand matchups a little bit more, in my personal view, and also do a little bit more research into how to make a better matchup. Because Jose Ramirez, although it was kind of a matchup where Devin Haney was supposed to be dominant on the surface, you got to take certain factors into account. And there was a possibility that Devin Haney, after that Ryan Garcia fight, that he was not going to be the same fighter. And that, I mean, if I was going to put Devin Haney in the ring with somebody, I'm not exactly sure who maybe I would have put him in the ring with. I would have not put him in the ring with anyone super dangerous, because, of course, Haney is one of your main money contributors. But at the end of the day, the point is that Jose Ramirez is someone that, although, yes, he's a Mexican pressure fighter, he's not someone that throws a whole lot. So in my view, there was someone else that needed to be in the ring with Devin Haney and possibly even Ryan Garcia. But unfortunately, just didn't happen for Turki.
Ramirez. Now, when I made my first video about this, I told you guys that Turki Alalshikh was obviously and clearly talking about Devin Haney when he fought Ramirez because of all of the backlash.
And that's possible, but how do you know that he's either A, mainly talking about Devin Haney, or just talking about him? I'm not saying that Dante's wrong necessarily, but Dante makes a lot of assertions, and a lot of it overall is pretty much unbased, or doesn't have a whole lot of evidence or proof behind it. And, that's pretty much overall a lot of the liberal or, the victimization mentality. And when I state that, that's not me stating overall that minorities or that, quote unquote, black people in America, that they do not deal with a certain amount of victimization or things that would make them a quote unquote victim. Certain people don't understand what I mean by that. The point being is that when you talk about the quote unquote liberal ideology, and I am not a conservative, but what the liberal ideology has really taught a lot of the minority communities, and also a certain amount of the Caucasians as well, but really a whole lot of people, is that it's okay to be a victim and not take self-accountability. It is what it is. Anyway, but the point is, and on top of that, they also want you to just, go into everything and not even just not even question it. Which is pretty much the key to intelligence, to research things and question things. They just want you to go off of your feelings and go immediately into it. That's why you see so many of these, posters whenever there's, a political issue about, if, I say this, and if you disagree with me, or if you don't want to speak up, just unfriend me right now or block me, all this other stuff. How could you not say anything about this? Well, some people don't say something because, they want to know the whole situation. But that's the thing about liberals. Once again, they're basically like, overall psychological Nazis. because they basically just want you overall to believe in something without even questioning it, and that's really something that, I can't get on board with. That's a sheeple type of mentality, and that really means that you're a part of a hive mind, and that, in my personal view, not only are you easy to manipulate, but you really don't have any individual thought process of your own, at least not as much as what you're trying to allege.
Backlash that came from race fans. But some of you guys in the comment section said, well, actually, he's talking about Canelo versus William Skull. I don't believe he's talking about Canelo versus William Skull. Now, it's possible that he...
Right, but you're stating overall that you don't believe that he's talking about. So once again, Dante, what is your evidence that Turki Alalshikh is mainly talking about that of a Devin Haney?
Could be talking about William Skull and Devin Haney.
And I have no doubt that he's probably talking to a certain degree about Devin Haney, but I think that he's talking about a multitude of fights. I think he realizes that he pretty much lost his ass on the Ryan Garcia versus, Rolly Romero fight, which was terrible. The Devin Haney versus Jose Ramirez fight, which was also terrible, or not that good, and of course the Canelo versus Skull fight, which, also in turn was not that good. So I think that this is a warning to Turki Alalshikh, or from Turki Alalshikh, excuse me, that, all my fighters that, for these events, you better start stepping it up. And if not, there's going to be consequences.
But let me just say this. In the Canelo versus William Skull fight, William Skull, he was actually outlanding Canelo in a lot of those rounds. In fact...
Well, I'm not 100% sure about that. But there were certain times overall to where he was landing on Canelo Alvarez, and Canelo was, of course, very wary about coming in. But the thing is that Canelo Alvarez, once again, the reason why I put a little bit more blame on William Skull within that fight is because he probably could have won that fight. Because Canelo Alvarez, Canelo still has a little bit left within him, but that, that orange, or that lemon, whatever you want to claim, it has about one more squeeze until it's completely dry. Canelo Alvarez is just nowhere near the same as what he once was. And Canelo has always had a little bit of a problem with guys who use lateral foot movement like that consistently. But, Canelo Alvarez, I've seen him adapt over time to someone of that style, or people that use foot movement, like Caleb Plant or Billy Joe Saunders or certain guys like that, and certain people may say that maybe they didn't use lateral movement as much as what this guy did. But the thing is that William Skull was barely thrown throughout the whole entire fight, and Canelo still did not feel comfortable. Now, could that be a part of his limitations in that area? Maybe. But, I also think that Canelo, that when you just take a look at him in his most recent fights, it's just very obvious that he's nowhere near the same. And a style that's always given Canelo Alvarez problems, especially against a bigger fighter in that of William Skull. He's just not a guy overall that can fight consistently against that type of style anymore. And he's always had trouble with that style in the first place. But even now at this age, that fight was not going to end up, super well. But anyway.
In fact, a lot of times Canelo Alvarez, he got William Skull in the corner or he backed him up to the ropes. Canelo Alvarez, he would freeze up and he would back up because he was afraid of the counter. So it was Canelo Alvarez's fault, the reason why this fight played out the way it did.
Well, it's partially Canelo Alvarez's fault, but it's also partially William Skull's fault. Because at the end of the day, William Skull did not really throw a whole lot. He did not do enough to really win. And that's why I do criticize William Skull for that fight. Because, dude, you have Canelo Alvarez, who's a few inches shorter than you, if not even a little bit more in front of you. He's obviously being affected by his age. And on top of that, he's having a very difficult time getting within your range. And you're just staring at him? Like, come on, dude.
Oh, he did not show a Mike Tyson killer instinct. He was afraid of getting caught with something and possibly getting hurt. People always talk about how good...
Well, I think Canelo Alvarez was just worried about overall getting caught and possibly getting outboxed overall, and pretty much adapting to his limitations that he knows that he has, to kind of adjust to at this point in time in his career. Canelo Alvarez is not a guy that is in his prime anymore. He's nowhere near his peak. He's not a guy, to be quite honest with you, I'm not really even sure if he's in his prime anymore. I think that Canelo Alvarez has really been out of his prime, especially for the past couple of years. You could still maybe debate that he was somewhat in a prime state, when he was fighting Golovkin and fighting, Jermell Charlo. But after those fights, I've never seen a version of prime Canelo ever again.
Good Canelo Alvarez's chin is. But it doesn't matter how good your chin is in the sport of boxing if you get caught with the perfect punch that you don't see, that you don't brace.
Right, but I don't think that's what Canelo Alvarez was worried about, Dante. I don't think Canelo Alvarez was worried about getting caught overall with the perfect shot that he just didn't see coming against Skull. I'm not saying overall that Canelo, that maybe it wasn't in the back of his mind at all. But I mean, I don't think that was the main concern. I think Canelo Alvarez knew that, this dude that, especially for my lack of movement at this time and age, I have to fight this guy in a very specific way, and it's going to overall limit my ability to hit him because not only have I had an issue with this style in the past, but on top of that, I, especially with Canelo's slower feet at times, I can't overall, catch up to this guy as much as what I really want to. So Skull really could have won that fight, had he been a level higher. But, because he doesn't really have that greatness within him, he pretty much gave away that fight.
Brace yourself for it. And Canelo, he understands that. That's why he played it safe. Not only does he not have the heart of a Mike Tyson, but he doesn't have the heart of a Gervonta Tank Davis. Gervonta...
And, of course, here comes DontaesBoxingNation, of course, regular hater rate on Canelo Alvarez. Anyway, now, of course, I understand a little bit of criticism with Canelo Alvarez. If this had been Canelo Alvarez from, 2020 or something like that, or a little bit earlier, I think the criticism should have been much higher. But, it's very obvious, at least for those of us that seen a peak version of Canelo, Canelo's really been going downhill for the past 4 or 5 years. Now, Dante, of course, he's not really going to admit that because he wants Crawford to defeat Canelo Alvarez, so overall he can basically claim about how overrated Canelo always was. But, I mean, the truth is that Canelo is just, he's about one squeeze away from being completely washed. He's nowhere near the same fighter as what he once was. He's just not.
Say he was in the exact same situation when he fought Frank Martin. He was fighting against a guy who was using a lot of foot movement, moving all around the ring. But what did Gervonta do? Gervonta completely cut the ring off. He trapped him in the corner and beat him up and knocked him out. Canelo Alvarez, he did the opposite. When he got him in the corner, Canelo Alvarez, he backed up because he was afraid of the...
And although I do slightly agree with that, what I will personally state is this. Like I said, Canelo Alvarez is turning 35 this year. Now, certain people will say, well, 35 isn't really that old. But, once again, when you talk about Canelo Alvarez and how long he's been fighting and how many fighters he has fought in his career and how a certain amount of them have been bigger than him, lengthier than them, and sometimes weighed more than him, is going to take its toll. He's been fighting professionally for 20 years. So a certain amount of people, once again, they don't understand how much age Canelo really has on him. Gervonta was really at his peak form when he fought Frank Martin. So although I get Dante's point, we also have to take that into context.
...of the counter. Matter of fact, let me go ahead and present to you guys Exhibit A. Watch this right here. If you notice, Canelo Alvarez, he's cutting off the ring. And he has William Skull where he wants to have him. His back is against the ropes. But soon as Canelo has his back against the ropes, look what he does. He finally got Skull to stand still with his back against the ropes, but Canelo is reluctant to throw a punch. There it is right there, because Canelo is worried about the counter. So instead of pushing...
Well, like I said, you can tell that Canelo Alvarez, that he's just much slower than what he used to be. And if Canelo doesn't play his cards right, especially being the much shorter and not lengthy fighter compared to that of William Skull, then he's going to get hit. And then on top of that, William Skull is going to be able to move around him. So Canelo was doing somewhat of the right things. It just wasn't really, the style matchup to where it was made for the most entertaining fight, especially because Skull had the size advantage. So, I mean, it just wasn't going to end up that way.
Pushing forward, Canelo, he retreats. He backs up. Canelo, he did that the entire night. Because a lot of times when he did go in for the attack, William Skull was actually beating him to the punch. Almost every single time Canelo Alvarez threw punches, William Skull, he would throw punches with Canelo. And like I told you guys...
Well, there were certain times overall where it would happen, but I don't know if he would really throw punches with Canelo Alvarez, at least according to my recollection. Now, maybe I'm wrong about that, but the problem was with William Skull is that he just didn't take charge enough within that fight, and it made him lose the fight.
As a lot of times he was outlanding Canelo Alvarez, landing more punches than Canelo in the round. So some people believe that when he put up that bizarre post saying that he doesn't want any Tom and Jerry shit in the sport of boxing, some of you guys believe he was talking about Terrence Crawford, and he was trying to put pressure on Terrence Crawford to fight the way that Canelo needs him to fight in order for Canelo to have a chance to win this fight. Well, let me go ahead.
I don't think that Turki Alalshikh overall is, trying to do it so Canelo Alvarez has a better chance to win. I mean, of course there's a little bit of that, but I think that basically what, because that might be the way that Dante is trying to spin it. He's saying that, oh, he's only trying to do this so Canelo will have more of a chance to win. That way Canelo can beat Crawford to appease to the race fans. I think all Turki Alalshikh is trying to do is that he's saying, look, some of these fighters, although, we've made some matchups with some great fighters, it's not resulting in great events. So at the end of the day, we got to try to put on better events. No more of this quote unquote running bullshit or fighters not wanting to engage. We have to put on better performances, if I'm going to continue to put on bigger fights. That's just the way that I see it. Now, I mean, do I think that, of course, that's completely right overall to change certain boxer styles? No, not necessarily, but I understand overall what he's trying to say. But unfortunately for Turkey, he had certain fighters where, at the point in time, Canelo, he's just older than what he used to be. He's not, he's not really anywhere near what he used to be. When you talk about that of a Devin Haney, he was coming off of the Ryan Garcia loss, and we didn't really know how good he was going to be. Jose Ramirez is basically washed. He's nowhere near what he once was. When you talk about that of a Teofimo Lopez and Arnold Barbosa, anyone that really, knew both of their styles knew that that was not a great stylistic matchup for entertainment. Although Teofimo Lopez, of course, put on a great performance, but Barbosa is, kind of a, counterpuncher that will only throw here and there. He works off of accuracy. And if you work off of accuracy and if you don't use any amount of volume against Teofimo Lopez, you're probably going to lose because Teofimo Lopez is a guy that also works off of accuracy, but he has a little bit more volume, and he's also a guy that can be very decently slick. And that's why I stated heading into that fight that Barbosa, I think people are going to finally realize that he's very good, but he's not anything that is, exceptionally special. And that's exactly what ended up happening within that fight. So it's unfortunate, but, a lot of these matchups overall, they just have not ended up being that, great. And I think Turki Alalshikh is finally starting to see that, Canelo Alvarez, that he's not what he once was. And I think overall that he does want the Crawford and Canelo fight to be highly entertaining, but we'll see how entertaining it's going to be, because if Crawford did somehow end up winning a decision over Canelo and, the fight wasn't that particularly close because Canelo just can't catch him, and on top of that, Canelo Alvarez is just very obvious slower than what he used to be, I wouldn't be surprised. Because like I said, Canelo just, he's nowhere near what he used to be. Like, he's probably about 40% of what he used to be.
Go ahead and say this. For those of you guys who don't know, Turki Alalshikh, he's already come out publicly. He's already said that Terence Crawford is his favorite fighter. He made this Crawford versus Canelo Alvarez fight not for Canelo. He made this fight for Terence Crawford. Not only that, but Terence Crawford has never ran in the ring. Crawford can do it all. He can fight on the front foot. He can fight on the back foot. He can back you up. He can outbox you. He is extremely versatile, and that's what it takes to be.
Agreed. Terence Bud Crawford is extremely versatile, and that's what makes him a great all-around fighter. That being stated, Canelo Alvarez at his all-around best. He's also an extremely versatile fighter and multi-dimensional fighter. Now, of course, is Dante ever going to be able to realize that? No. Because there's no offense against Dante. And first of all, not only is his judgment, obviously, clouded over Canelo Alvarez because he hates his guts. But on top of that, he doesn't really know enough about boxing. And on top of that, the styles and, an all-around skill set. And when a fighter is really multidimensional, when they're not, he doesn't really have any clue. But, it is what it is. I've already told people this. You can't be 5'7.5" with a 71-inch arm reach. Actually, not even having the 71-inch arm reach, having more like a 70-inch reach. And then and then overall you end up beating guys that sometimes are 6 foot or over, and you're a 4-weight division champion when really you probably should have peaked at the middleweight division. People don't understand how all-around skilled you have to be. And even Terence Bud Crawford has said that about Canelo.
To become
But the problem is, at least on Canelo's end, is that does he really have enough left in the tank? Because Canelo Alvarez is just, his movement is nowhere near what it used to be. He doesn't really have the same upper body movement as what he once did. His volume and his amount of punches are decreasing fight by fight from what I see. His defensive ability is decreasing. His speed is not really as much as what it used to be. I mean, his power is still somewhat there, but it's not like even that is on a phenomenal level anymore. So it's like, I don't know. We'll see. But of course, Crawford I don't think is any spring chicken either, but I do think that Canelo does have more wear and tear out of the two.
The best fighter in the world. You cannot be the best fighter in the world and be predictable.
Well, right now, in my personal view, the best fighter, or at least the #1 pound-for-pound fighter, would have to be Usyk. Now, of course, would Dante ever agree with that? No, because what Dante's narrative always basically is that, whenever there's a Caucasian or, a non-black fighter at the #1 pound-for-pound spot, they're just doing that overall because of a racialized issue. It can't be because Usyk beat and became undisputed in a very tough and very talented cruiserweight division, and then became undisputed against AJ Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury and Danny Dubois, 3 fighters that outweighed him by 20 plus pounds and were looked at as decent fighters at the time. It came because of that. And on top of that, because he's an extraordinarily talented fighter. Can't because of that. It's because, Usyk is a guy that, overall, he's being used racially. And I'm sure some people do put him at his number 1 pound for pound or at their number 1 pound for pound because of the racialist angle. But at the end of the day, Usyk does deserve to be in the conversation.
Predictable and one-dimensional. This is the reason why all of the best professional boxers in the world, they praise Terence Crawford more than any other fighter. From the Oya Inoue.
Well, they do right now, especially after the Errol Spence fight. But let's not forget, just a few years ago, or no, I'm not going to say a few years ago, but more than that, all the fighters in the world were praising Canelo Alvarez, especially a lot of the black fighters, Devin Haney. Crawford even to a degree was with Canelo Alvarez, the Charlo brothers, Gervonta Tank Davis. They all claimed that Canelo Alvarez was the number 1 pound for pound fighter in the world. And what did Dante basically try to state? He stated that, oh, well, they're just appeasing to the race fans. You got to say the truth, about who the best fighter is in the world. So whenever it comes to them giving compliments to a fighter, overall that may be the best in the world, it's either a racialist angle or they're appeasing the race fans. But whenever it comes to the fighter that he wants to be the number 1 pound for pound in the world, all of a sudden it's because it's their authentic thought. But anyway.
To Alexander Usyk, to Dimitri Bivol, because they all want to be as dominant as Terence Crawford. You think Bivol is going to listen to Turki Alalshikh when he says he doesn't want to see runners and he doesn't want to see fighters being chased? Bivol not trying to hear that. Bivol is not going to get...
Yes, and I'm sure overall that Turki Alalshikh overall realized that, which is exactly why he said, okay, I'm just going to make the ring shorter because I know that I can't really change a lot of these fighters' styles. But if I possibly make the ring a little bit smaller, then it might increase the entertainment value.
Get knocked out for Turki Alalshikh or anybody. You think Madrimov is going to listen to what Turki said? Imagine if Ortiz had to fight against Murder Zaliev. I can guarantee you.
This guy overall is trying to put Madrimov and Murder Zaliev or whatever the fuck his name is. They keep trying to put these two fighters in the same category as Artur Beterbiev and that of Dimitri Bivol. Overall, in order to try to put them on the same level as, them, so Crawford's resume will look better. Dude, Madrimov is not on the same level as Beterbiev and Bivol. He never has been, and neither is Murder Zaliev or whatever the hell his name is. They're not on the same level.
Ortiz would turn into a boxer, meaning he would move around the ring and try to set up traps. Just think about what Turki said. Turki said he doesn't want to...
Let me also state this about Virgil Ortiz very quickly, because apparently there's new rumblings and new rumors about a potential Jaron Boots Ennis versus Virgil Ortiz fight. Don't underestimate Virgil Ortiz in that fight. Virgil Ortiz overall is a guy that, in my view, is a highly level-skilled boxer. He's also someone that is very good defensively. He has a very good jab. He's someone that's also very powerful. And if that fight were to happen, although I would favor Jaron Boots Ennis in most fights, I'm not 100% sure if Jaron Boots Ennis would win that fight. I'm not stating that I would go against him necessarily, but if he ended up winning, or if he ended up losing that fight, against Virgil Ortiz, wouldn't be shocked at all.
Want to see boxers get chased. Well, the whole purpose of moving in the ring is to set up traps. Get your opponent to chase you and run into something. Terence Crawford, he recently broke this whole...
Right, but the problem is that although that's great and, certain fighters move on the back foot, and although I agree with Dante that should be allowed and not criticized, at least, unless there's an exception, the problem is this. 2 of the fights overall that have recently happened, have had, I believe, all-time low performance rates, or, had like a low amount of punch statistics. So that's the problem. So Turki, I think, is trying to light a fire under their ass. Will it work? We'll see.
Whole situation down. And he made every single thing that Turki Alalshikh said sound foolish. In this clip where he completely shut down a decaf, which stands for dumb casual ass fan.
He said he's going
Which would include you.
He's going to run. see, that's why you don't know much about boxing. What is boxing? Where you at? Where you at? Come here. Where you at? Let me see. What is it? No, that's not fighting. Fighting ain't even in the definition of boxing. What is boxing? hit and not get hit. It's a sign. Okay, so tell me this. No, I'm gonna support my little brother.
Of course you are.
Okay, so what's easier? Me standing in front of you, going blow for blow, or me hitting you?
Now, he stated overall that I'm going to support my little brother, so more than likely, who was he talking about? Shakur Stevenson. The problem is with Shakur Stevenson, although I wouldn't necessarily call him a runner, some of his most recent performances have been a little bit uninspiring or not inspiring. Now, that being stated overall, do I think that he's a very skilled fighter? Yes, I do. But the problem is with Shakur Stevenson, in my view, it's not necessarily that he's a quote-unquote runner or someone that is highly defensive, although, of course, he can be defensive. The problem is with Shakur is that it's very obvious that he realizes that his level of power, that it's not competing with a lot of these guys, and that, he's a little bit not confident in order to compete with some of those guys or fight in a way that he really wants to. He realizes that he has to be a little bit more careful in some of these fights, and he's going to have to, because there's no offense against Stevenson, but his power is just really not that effective at 135. It's just not. And if he gets in the ring against the wrong fighter, especially with good level skills and power, it can end up very badly for him.
And making sure that you can't hit me. What's harder?
We're moving to hit and run.
Huh? Okay, so if that's harder, then what's so
But
bad?
like you did to win the fight, not running around.
No, it's harder, right?
No,
It's harder for me to hit you.
Devin Haney, look at Devin Haney.
It's harder for me to hit you. It's harder for me to hit you, and you not hit me back, right? But it's easier for me to sit here and anybody can do this, sit here and fight, right?
Yeah, but
And I agree with what Crawford is, stating there. But that being stated overall, there is a difference overall, once again, with moving in and outside of the range or setting up, and on top of that, putting on a good performance by using your feet and using your legs to move in and out, or be more on the back pedal, or, kind of running around the ring overall, like what that of a Ryan Garcia did against Rolly Romero, or like what a William Skull did against Canelo Alvarez. So there is a difference between the two.
it's a fighting game.
Answer the question. It's not a fight game. It's not a fight game. It's not a fight game.
We want to watch the fight, not
That's
sleep.
what you want to do.
But anybody wants to.
But you want to watch UFC.
No, I don't want to.
Okay, so you want to watch bare knuckle.
Well, the thing is about UFC overall, and this is the thing that boxers always want to state, because they believe that boxing is just, that much more quote-unquote classy or, all of that stuff than the UFC. There are certain fighters that would be classified as quote-unquote runners in the UFC as well. There are certain times overall where fighters were criticized for running in the UFC as well. Whenever you're in a combat sport, listen, at the end of the day, you're going to have certain fighters that fight more in the back pedal. There's nothing wrong with that. But the problem comes in is when you just don't throw any punches, anyway.
Bare knuckle boxing.
No, none of that.
You don't want to watch boxing.
Of course I do.
No, you want to watch street fighting. Let's
No,
go.
no, no.
Okay, so when Ali say flow like a butterfly, sting like a bee, what that mean?
But he didn't do that. He didn't do that. He kept running in circles.
No, what do that mean?
So that's what Terrence Crawford feels about what Turki Alalshikh said. At the end of the day, you do what it takes to win. When it comes to once again,
I agree, you do what it takes to win, but Terrence Bud Crawford is a fighter that I would never classify him as someone that is quote-unquote ran around the ring. There are certain fighters overall that move on the back foot very good, and know what to do on the back foot and how to win the fight by any means necessary, such as Mayweather, sometimes Ali, Terrence Crawford, and then there are people that I've seen run in certain fights to where they didn't throw a damn thing throughout the whole entire fight. Like William Skull versus Canelo Alvarez, or, like that of a, what was his name? Gilmore Rigondeaux versus John Rio Casamero. Now, of course, those fighters that were pressuring really couldn't land a whole lot either. But if you have the advantage and if your opponent cannot cut off the ring very well, then you're going to have to take charge. You're going to have to take charge in order to land more shots. And if you don't, that is going to count against you on the judges.
again, fans trying to criticize Devin Haney's performance against Ramirez. What makes no sense is that's the very first time that Devin Haney...
Well, the reason why Devin Haney, in my view, the reason why he doesn't get that much criticism from me is because he was coming off of a very poor performance over Ryan Garcia, and he's still trying to recuperate. So I'm not going to go that hard after him. And on top of that, Haney, in my view, he has went after a lot of the bigger names. He has a very good resume, so I give Devin Haney a lot of credit. But what I will state is this: that fight was not the most entertaining fight. And I understand that people overall can, they can also take the angle where they say, well, Jose Ramirez should have caught off the ring more, blah, 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 right? But Devin Haney is a guy that, listen, at the end of the day, it's a little bit of both of their faults because it was like an all-time low punch ratio. So, I mean, it is what it is. A little bit of blame does have to go on both of them. But I'm not going to go after Haney that much because obviously it's hard after coming off of a performance after Ryan Garcia like that, really ruining a lot of your confidence. So, I get it. But Devin Haney is going to have to, adjust his style a little bit more, at least to put on better performances in the future. Because if he performs like that against the Teofimo Lopez or someone else, he could potentially lose the fight.
Devin Haney has ever fought
at least if he doesn't land consistently
like that. Usually Devin Haney is standing right in front of you. And before, race fans, they were trying to clown Devin Haney because he was getting hit with punches.
Well, I'm not really going to claim overall that Devin Haney will sit right in front of you. Devin Haney is a guy that always has used his feet, and he always kind of moves around you, but he's somewhat within the range. So I understand what Dante is trying to state, but let's not sit here and pretend like Devin Haney was ever a fighter that would just quote-unquote sit in front of you. That's not his style. And it's fine to not have that style, but the thing is that he was never a fighter that would just quote-unquote sit in front of you. Now, were there times overall against certain fighters to where he stood a little bit more in front of them, like Jorge Linares, where people finally criticized his chin, because he got hurt against Linares? I never really criticized Haney's chin. Actually, I think that Haney has a great chin. And the reason why I say that is because Haney overall, he gets hit by some of the more powerful punchers, and he still overall is standing up. Whether it be Lomachenko or Jorge Linares, of course, he got knocked down by Ryan Garcia. But Ryan Garcia is literally a phenomenal level puncher. Like, it's like Ryan Garcia's speed and strength are literally like the only two A-grade qualities that he has within his boxing ability. No other ability that he has are A-grade level. None. So, I mean, I don't really fault Devin Haney for that, but he got back up every single time. So, the thing is that with Devin Haney is that he's not an A-grade level defensive fighter. That's his issue. Devin Haney, although a lot of people, they would state that, he's a guy that would be quote-unquote elite level defensively, and many people, assume that he is because he's a black American fighter, and they immediately associate him with fighters like Pernell Sweepy Whitaker or Floyd Mayweather. Devin Haney's not that guy. Now, he may move in a similar but when you talk about that of a defensive ability, no, he's not a defensive master, and that's why he gets hit within a certain amount of his fights and does look vulnerable at certain times. Whether it be even against smaller guys like Lomachenko or certain guys like that, or Jojo Diaz, or guys his own same size like Ryan Garcia.
I mean, even before he fought Ryan Garcia, remember when they kept playing the clips of him getting hit by Linares? So when Devin Haney was getting hit, race fans were clowning him. When he didn't get hit and moved around the ring, they still clowned him.
Now, I do agree overall with DontaesBoxingNation that you're just not going to be able to appease those fans because they don't like black fighters or that they don't like Devin Haney in general. So although DontaesBoxingNation, what he's stating to a degree, is relevant, Devin Haney is not a fighter that really has ever been a quote-unquote stand in front of you guy. That's not his style. Devin Haney's advantages are mainly his foot speed, moving around the ring, using his height and length. And if you do compete with him in terms of the height and length, he is going to have a little bit more of an issue because he is not an elite defensive fighter. He's just not.
And this is what they do with every single black boxer. As soon as a black boxer gets hit with 2 or 3 clean shots, they say he's been exposed. But when he doesn't...
I do agree with that. That is a double standard that happens a lot against black boxers, and that is one of the things that Dante does speak up on that I think overall is, he does deserve a great amount of credit for that. That being stated, Dante oftentimes just takes it way, way, way too far and oftentimes reciprocates that same energy for many fighters that are non-black.
Doesn't get hit, they call him a runner or boring because the truth is they just want to see him lose. I mean, for anyone to imply that Terrence Crawford, he's supposed to move up 3 weight classes and then just stand right in front of Canelo the entire fight, not using...
You notice how they keep saying quote-unquote 3 weight classes. Crawford is not moving up 3 weight classes, he's moving up 2. Because recently he just became a champion at 154, right? But what they're basically trying to tell you is that Terrence Bud Crawford, that he's a guy that's really moving up 3 weight classes because, he's not a guy that really is a natural 154 pounder, but they won't have this energy without the fighters that they know that they need to tear down, like Canelo. Because Canelo is not really a super middleweight. He's really a middleweight fighter. Now, of course, is Crawford a guy that, in my view, may have a slight disadvantage for fighting even a middleweight fighter like Canelo at super middleweight? Possibly. But Canelo's not really a super middleweight, not at 5'7" with a 71-inch arm reach. I mean, no. And a lot of those guys on top of that outweigh him anyway? No.
using any angles, not using any slick movement, and just exchange with no responsibility, clearly just wants to see Terrence Crawford lose. And they want
Well, I don't think overall that's what Turkey is trying to say about Terrence Bud Crawford. I think all he's stating is that, it better be more action-packed overall than some of the more recent fights because we cannot lose our ass on this event.
Canelo Alvarez to have the best chance of winning. But Crawford is not there to help Canelo Alvarez. He's not there to hold his hand and say, hey, Canelo, I know you're not as good as me, so let me go ahead and get on my knees like I would do with my little son and let you just tee off on me. No, it's not Crawford's responsibility to help Canelo and make things easier for him because he's not as talented as Terrence Crawford. I mean, what's next?
And let me also state this. Peak v. peak, Canelo Alvarez is not only debatably just as talented as Crawford, he's possibly even more talented. And I know that certain people overall are not going to agree with that. Crawford is a great all-around boxer, but his ability is a bit slight overrated. And I'm not stating overall that he's not a great all-around boxer or that you cannot even debate his ability over Canelo. And although Crawford definitely has the feet advantage over that of Canelo, Canelo actually has something that, is probably even more hard to work on in terms of skill, which is elite upper body movement and on top of that defensive ability. Crawford does not have the all-around defensive ability nor upper body movement of a Canelo. But Canelo Alvarez also does not have the feet or the reach of a Crawford, which is why Canelo, in terms of that fight, the upper body movement and the defensive ability and pressuring Crawford is going to be highly essential. But the problem is that Canelo I don't know if he has the same upper body movement anymore. And that was really going to be one of the main advantages in the fight. Now, he still does have upper body movement, but it's nowhere near as fast and it's nowhere near as sharp as what he used to be.
They gonna tell Terrence Crawford not to switch to southpaw? Crawford is not gonna be there on September.
And for some people that want to debate me overall, once again, about the quote-unquote who has greater defense between Canelo and Crawford, let me just state this. For those of you that don't know, in a lot of their bigger fights or in a lot of fights in general, believe it or not, Canelo Alvarez's accuracy numbers are just about as accurate as Crawford, sometimes if not even a bit more. And the level of punches or the connect percentage that his opponents will throw, they land at a less percentage than what Terrence Bud Crawford's opponents land at. Keep in mind that when Crawford, I believe, when he fought that of Sean Porter, Terrence Bud Crawford, although he gets claimed as a very accurate puncher, and he's not really as accurate as what a lot of people would claim. He didn't even land 30% against that of Sean Porter, a fighter that had already lost several fights in his career, and on top of that, a fighter that had like a 5-inch reach disadvantage. And he landed at a higher percentage, for example, than say what a Danny Jacobs did over that of a Canelo Alvarez, and both of those fighters would have probably been looked at similar esteem in both of their careers at that time. But keep in mind that Danny Jacobs was 6 foot. He's also a guy that has about a 73 to 74 inch reach, and I believe that he landed at a less percentage over Canelo Alvarez, and Canelo landed at a higher percentage than what Crawford did, I believe, in that fight. If I'm wrong about that, someone correct me. But that's why I state when people just claim that, Crawford is way more skilled than Canelo, they really don't know anything about boxing. But it is what it is.
To cooperate or help Canelo Alvarez. That is the job of Canelo's trainer. Crawford's job is to take advantage of Canelo's weaknesses. If Canelo is slow on his feet, then you use foot movement to frustrate him and set him up with traps.
And I agree with that. That's going to be one of Crawford's key advantages. Now, the question is about Crawford because we don't know how he's going to come into this fight either. Will the weight gain, because it appears that he tried to gain a lot of weight, will the weight gain be more of a negative than it would be a positive?
Canelo is vulnerable to getting hit with jabs, then guess what you do? You hit his ass with jabs. We all know that if some boxer that was not black was able to beat a Shakur Stevenson, a Terrence Crawford, a Gervonta Tank Davis, a Keyshawn Davis, and they were able to do it by constantly moving around the ring, hitting and not getting hit, and frustrating those black fighters, they would be completely praised by the...
I completely agree with that point 100%. I do agree with Dante on that. A lot of the reason overall why a certain amount of these fighters or a certain amount of these fans, criticize those quote-unquote fighters is because they realize that, it's just a style that a lot of these other demographics or other fighters cannot deal with. I do agree with that.
These race fans and old media. Remember, after the first Wilder versus Tyson Fury fight, who did the race fans praise? They praised Tyson Fury for moving around the ring, sticking and moving, and not even really throwing that many punches. We know what time it is. They would
We want to talk about a fighter not throwing that many punches. We also should talk about Deontay Wilder. because Deontay Wilder barely threw shit in that first fight. That draw was a horrendous decision. It very clearly should have went to Fury, but it was obvious, overall that they were clearly trying to get that Wilder AJ fight. So they had to have a rematch in hopes that Wilder was going to win, and then Fury completely threw a monkey wrench in their plans.
Never expect one of their favorite fighters to move up 2 or 3 weight classes, fight a power puncher, and not move around the ring. Just stand in front of him and give that guy his best chance of winning. With that being said, I'm going to wrap this video up. That's all I got for now, guys. I'm on to the next one.
But anyways, that pretty much is about it, all I have to say for this. But as for Turki Alalshikh, I don't think he meant any offense. I think all he was meaning is that we have to improve these type of matchups. But once again, Turki is, unfortunately for him, he's making a certain amount of matchups that seem good on paper. But when you really take a look at them, more in depth, a lot of them probably are not good matchups, at least at this time. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.